Alright, I'm gonna record this by the seat of my pants. I'm just gonna go over a writing revisit off the cuff. I know what I'm gonna talk about, but I haven't read over it yet. I don't want to spoil myself. Now, before we go off into non-Godzilla things, I just wanted to say that today, me and my girlfriend went to Walmart, and we got this guy. It's a handmade by robots knit series Godzilla figure. Statue, whatever you want to call it. I haven't opened him yet, and I don't know if I'm going to. The funny thing is, you can tell my girlfriend has been with me too long, because she was like, well, it's like you said, scalpers might buy him and then resell him online for exorbitant prices. And I was like, yeah, I guess that's a good point. So we got it. That's how you can tell she's been in a relationship with a Godzilla fan for too long. Granted, it's been less than a year, but that might still be too long. Anyway, what am I talking about today? Obviously, anybody who has watched this channel for any length of time knows that I am a Sonic fan. Now, my first Sonic game was this guy right here, Sonic Heroes, but on the back of the manual for this, just to catch all the youngins up to speed, video games used to have physical manuals printed and included in the case for the game, but I believe in the case for Sonic Heroes, at the back of the manual, there was an advertisement for this game, Sonic Mega Collection Plus. And so I believe Sonic Mega Collection Plus was the next game in the franchise that I got for my PlayStation 2. Now, if you aren't completely illiterate and you read the title for this video, you probably have an idea of where this is going now that I have mentioned Mega Collection Plus. Though all of the Sonic games on the Sega Genesis were included in Sonic Mega Collection Plus, there were also a couple of generic random Genesis games included in this collection that were unlockables. And among them were chiefly two games. The first of which I did play a decent amount, was Comix Zone. It was like a beat-em-up that took place within a living comic book world. I never played it all the way through, but it was a solid title. But there was another game included in Mega Collection Plus that intrigued me beyond just Comix Zone, and that was Ooze. Now, I never played through the Ooze all the way through. I don't even think I ever got through the first level. So this summarization that I'm about to give is probably vastly incomplete. But basically, some guy makes like some wonder drug genetic chemical thing, and he takes it, and it turns him into a sentient puddle of Nickelodeon green slime. And I think his higher-ups like flush him down the toilet or something, like they're trying to cover it up. There's like a conspiracy. You're not supposed to be alive, but obviously because he took an experimental super drug, the main character, whose name I don't even know, turns into the Ooze and goes on a quest of vengeance to destroy the corporation, whose name I don't even know off the top of my head. I imagine going through this piece of writing will enlighten me to some of those things, because I probably did do some research for it. Now, what is the piece of writing we're going over today, since I'm going over the Ooze and all this stuff? Today we are going over my idea for an Ooze sequel, and it's called The Ooze Toxic Rampage. Now, just before we start going over it, this might seem like a totally non-relevant detail, but I promise that it is. I want you to keep this in mind. One of my top 3 favorite Marvel Comics superheroes is Ghost Rider, and this idea for the Ooze Toxic Rampage definitely is inspired by the gameplay for the Ghost Rider game on the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation Portable. Just keep that in mind, because it'll probably make some of the decisions that I made in this write-up a lot more sensical. Just before we really truly dive into it, I will link the archive for this article on Fanon Wiki in the description if you wish to read it yourself. I posted several articles to the Fanon Wiki, some of which I might cover on this channel, some of which I probably will not, and one of which I definitely will not. But if you want to read through this at your own leisure and at your own pace, that will be in the description. Okay, it starts with a quote here. "I guess you haven't changed, Crane. It seems to me like you still won't die." And that's from the president of Hazard. So I don't know if that was the guy's actual name, Crane, I'm gonna hazard a guess and say maybe it was, but I don't know for a fact. And then the president of Hazard was probably the corporation that tried to kill the Ooze in the first game. Platforms. It was supposed to be on the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, and the Wii. The first two made sense because those were the juggernaut consoles of the time at which I made this concept. The Wii was probably just because we didn't have an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3, so we probably just wanted to be included in my own concept for the game. It's an action-adventure game in the Ooze series, which I don't believe there were any other Ooze games after the first one, so kind of hard to really call it a series, but okay. It was rated T for teen. If you watched my Game Boxes video, which had ideas of markedly lower quality, you would know that I really seem to have a penchant for making things rated T for teen. It was single player, multiplayer, and had online multiplayer. I didn't even remember that. Although, I imagine that was like online co-op. And the developers were Radical Entertainment. I want to know why I picked that as the development team. I'm sure they've made plenty of good games. I know they made The Simpsons Hit and Run. And they seem to also have made The Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction. And I know that led to the Prototype games. So, just based off of what I remember, they would have been perfect developers for this concept. Obviously, the designer was me, but I mean, and then the release date was TBA, and it never will get released. Okay. The new take on the old and mostly forgotten game, The Ooze. It is set for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Nintendo Wii. I don't think it was set for anything except for the dustbin of history. You can tell when this was written because it says that it will be free roaming, because free roaming games have become a bit of an oversaturated market over the years. But obviously I was young when I originally wrote this concept down, so okay, what's the plot? The previous game's events are redone. I must not have known the word, but retconned for the sake of making a more interesting plot. Yeah, I don't remember being very fond of the full plot for the original game, even when I was young enough to have written this, as should be evidenced by the fact that I don't remember pretty much any of it. Okay, so Crane worked for Hazard Incorporated, which wasn't necessarily a chemical development company, it was a chemical disposal company, so I imagine that wasn't what it was originally. I imagine I retconned it to make it more unique. But of course, it was developing stuff under the table. It doesn't say what the drug was for, I guess. Well, let me keep reading. It doesn't seem like it is going to mention it. It was probably like a chemical resistance drug. You know, something to soup up the disposal teams to make sure they didn't die when they got rid of the chemicals that they had to transport. But the authorities get suspicious, and then the people in charge of Hazard Inc. just hire mercenaries to take out Dr. Crane. But he had already taken the experimental drug, which wasn't fully finished yet, so they thought he was dead, but in actuality, it just mutated him and kept him alive. He attacks and destroys Hazard's main perimeter, as if we have a frame of reference for whatever that's supposed to look like or be. Oh, wait a minute. That might have just been the, retcon version of the events of the first game happening within the continuity of this game. Oh, okay, so he just kind of dipped and hid out in the sewers of whatever city or location Hazard HQ was in order to heal himself. So he goes underground for 30 years. Okay, so his healing basically restores his cognitive ability. So he's not just a blind rage monster like he was probably in the original game. Okay, so he was underground for 30 years, but apparently whatever damage he did to Hazard Incorporated in the first game didn't last for very long, because when he wakes back up, mutants have been created by the work of Hazard Incorporated. And of course, now that he can think clearly again, he figures he's got to finish what he started, right? I don't think I did this for the following reason, but a lot of those old 70s and 80s sci-fi stories, like The Planet of the Apes, or at the very least, the sequels to that, often made it so that there were clans of radioactive mutated humans, which often had their own enclaves. So this kind of fits in with that general motif that a lot of those science fiction stories had at those times. Alright, let me continue. Okay, he discovers slime bombs that could wipe out the city, which is so far unnamed. He fights through robots and scum busters, whatever the hell those are. He locates and destroys the bomb factory.
A bomb factory. They're bombs. Oh.
He's driven back into the sewers. Yeah, he discovers a mutant city. I'm imagining that's kind of like the mutants in Futurama and the Morlocks and the X-Men. And like I said, the radioactive mutants from the future in Planet of the Apes. Okay, so after that, he just goes to the new Hazard Incorporated skyscraper to wipe them out, particularly weapons development. And there's tar beds nearby, I guess. And after he does all that, the new mechs and soldiers, quote, cause problems. That's incredibly vague, old me. Okay, so that new skyscraper gets leveled. I do remember something akin to that. I do vaguely recall the tar beds, because I, for some reason, thought that was an interesting set piece for the Ooze to fight in. So the president of Hazard Incorporated reveals he has taken the drug himself and has turned into a strange new monster called the Pollution. I'm getting very, very, very strong MCU vibes from this. You know, where the villain is basically just a mirror copy of the hero. Don't hate the name. The name's not terrible. Okay, so he kills the Pollution, and then Hazard Inc. is destroyed for good this time. It was definitely destroyed for good the first time in the original game, but he's definitely won this time. And then he goes back to the sewers again, like he's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, ready to fight again one day. See, I was being smart. I was setting up a sequel. Okay, gameplay. This has a lot more written in it. It's an action-adventure game. Okay, it's free roam. Manholes, you know, the sewer covers, are basically fast travel points from what I'm gathering here. Okay, so from what I remember, because I do remember this a little bit, the Ooze basically has two modes of transportation, locomotion, and combat. The first is obviously the more classic Ooze form from the first game, where he's kind of just a head in a puddle of liquid. But that's his transportation form. He doesn't really have much combat ability. The combat form is more akin to the one that appears on the cover, you know, more of like a hunched over Ooze guy. And that one's more of combat. And I believe the combat form of the Ooze is the one that I was kind of trying to get at as being similar to the Ghost Rider game on PlayStation 2. But anyway, okay, he has a health bar. Okay, so if his health gets reduced to almost zero, he goes into a kind of rage state. So you'll do more damage when you're in low health mode, but you'll be almost dead, so it's risky. Yeah, later enemies will put up more of a fight, so you don't want to tempt death against them. Then he has an energy gauge, which you can fill up by landing combos. And then there's a third gauge for power-ups, but that doesn't appear unless you get said power-ups. Yeah, he has two stances. I think I already described that, but let me see if there's anything I forgot. Yeah, basically all it can do is hock loogies in the puddle form, but it's far faster, and it can traverse through pipes and stick to walls. So I'm imagining that that's more of the quote-unquote platforming form, whereas the combat form is as the name implies. This is definitely related to combat within the Ghost Rider game on the PlayStation 2, this bit about devouring enemies. That's very interesting. So if you devour certain items or a certain number of certain enemy types, you'll gain access to a specialized form. So he doesn't have like traditional power-up. It's more like if you defeat a certain number of enemies and consume them, you'll gain access to like a souped-up form. Now, there are probably also specific forms like the tar form, which is if you eat a tar barrel. That's an interesting kind of twist on combat, at least within a game of this sort of gameplay loop. Okay, he uses standard punches and slams to trump his foes, but he cannot jump. But he can morph into, you know, other weapons, I would assume. Like, I would imagine he could probably morph his arms into, like, hammers and machetes and stuff. Attacks such as the Bile, Bazooka, or Pentacle attacks by using energy from the energy gauge. Okay, that doesn't really tell us a whole lot, although he has tentacle abilities, which, not really sure how I feel about that, but it makes sense, I guess, for a liquid ooze kind of meta-human. So when you're in liquid form, obviously your combat abilities are very limited, but you can make like shields and like grab weaponry from the environment when you're in combat form. Okay, special forms and powers. Okay, so if you eat a lot of tar barrels, the ooze turns into oil. Okay, so in that form, he can instantly devour enemies, and he takes no damage from tar, but fire attacks will probably kill you damn near instantly. Okay, so that one's a temporary form, based on the writing here. Okay, so every super form can be basically deactivated by holding a standard attack and special attack button at the same time. I don't think I ever figured out what the kind of controller layout for this was, but I can't imagine it would be that hard to come up with an appropriate control scheme for that. Okay, it looks like most of the super forms just require you eating a certain type of enemy multiple times, and they each have different resistances. Inferno Ooze seems kind of cool. Basically, wherever you go, it leaves like a fire trail, and I imagine it probably lasts a decent amount of time, because otherwise, what's the point? It's interesting that the oil ooze lets you instantly devour enemies. It's probably to offset the fact that there's probably a lot of fire enemies in the area where you can eat the tar barrels. So it's probably, well, your enemies can pretty much one-shot kill you, so at least you can one-shot kill them as well. Ugh, fungal ooze. Oh, you have to eat enough crawler mutants to fill the meter. I guess that means that at some point you end up coming into conflict with the mutant clan underneath the map. So I guess I probably had an idea for that. It's probably involved in that segment of the story, but I wouldn't be able to tell you what that segment of the story even is. But by the fact that fungal ooze exists and has this condition for transforming into it, I can only imagine you probably come into conflict with the mutants at some point. It has increased stickiness and the ability to stun enemies. I imagine this one sounds kind of like it more so benefits the liquid form, not the combat form, although the stunning is probably the like olive branch, so to speak, to the combat form, so that at least fungal ooze is not completely useless when you transition between the mobile form and the combat form. Golden ooze was in the original game from what I recall. I imagine that one probably really buffs up the non-combat form, but the combat form probably becomes a monster. And red ooze, we've already talked about that. It basically makes you nigh all-powerful, you just might die to a stiff breeze. Okay, enemies. Okay, we got the razor beetle. I vaguely recall those because they were practically the only enemy of any note in the original Ooze game. Nuclear mosquito, I don't know if that's new or what. That's a cool name. They're probably rather similar to the demon bats, and probably most specifically similar to the crows from the Ghost Rider game. Cancer rats. Okay, so they're just enemies that can grab objects in the environment and chuck them at you. Can you imagine the Ooze just like beating the ever-loving shit out of like a giant fat rat? It's kind of cool. Hazmat gunner. They're hazmat ink soldiers with machine guns that are a pesky threat. That really tells us a lot. I imagine they're in like those yellow hazmat suits. Hazmat flamethrower. If I don't recall, those were probably like the unique new enemy for the tar fields. Crawler mutant. Okay, so they can crawl on walls. So I guess if you're like on a non-flat surface and you're like traversing it with the liquid form, they're gonna cause trouble, right? Because the combat form would probably be able to dispatch them rather easily, but the liquid form is not as combat capable. Gorilla mutant. Those are basically the giant bruiser enemies that you fight in the sewers probably with the combat form. They probably are also lumbering. Cannonball snail. Fast snails that can explode on will. Without any designs or pictures, I like that one. Don't know if I came up with that or if it was in the original game, but I like it. Acid vulture. Why are all of these enemies incredibly metal? They're basically vultures that can spit acidic rain and like shower the ooze with damage. I like that. Tar crocodiles. Have no concept of what they look like or sound like or how tough they are to fight, but just off of the concept, I love it. Scumbuster. Okay, so that's probably, if I were to guess, based on the Hulkbuster enemies from the Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction. That's just kind of the picture I'm getting in my head. And then the cannon mech is probably just the souped up version of the Scumbusters. The bosses of the game will not be revealed, but it is known that most of them will be based off of types of pollution. While I like that part, I probably just didn't have the time or inclination to actually figure out what the bosses for the game would be. Remember, this is just a wiki article that I posted a long time ago and never added to. And then the last part is the locations. Toxic sewers. The sewers found early on in the game. That's probably like the tutorial segment of the game, and it probably exists prior to the game kind of opening up into free roam mode, because we have to remember this game is a free roam game. The Endless Chasm. It's a pretty dope name. Okay, so that part links to Hazard Inc. Drainage waste processing. Processing plant building the waste bombs.
Bombs?
Overrun Kingdom, the mutants' degrading base of operations. I know I'm not really going into super detail with all these places, but I'm only going off of the article like you guys are. Wasted Factory, gateway to the surface from which the mutants intend to escape. That might be why you end up fighting the mutants, because Dr. Crane might not want the mutants to encroach upon the surface world of the regular humans who are probably unaware of the existence of the chemical mutants. Tar fields. Behind the new building is a wasteland of tar beds and hazmat crews. Okay, that's rather self-explanatory. Death Labs. Nothing sinister there. The new main Hazard Inc. building's shadowy test facility. And then the basement. And then finale, which is just the office for the president of Hazard Inc., who becomes the pollution. And then the Desolate Landfill, a bonus level received for beating the final boss. So a thought occurs. This sounds more like a kind of level progression system akin to the Ghost Rider game on the PlayStation 2, which I did play a lot when I was this age when I wrote this. It doesn't really feel like a free roam game. Maybe I was not really filling in the details on how it would be free roam, but this kind of feels like levels that you ascend through over the course of the story, much like in Ghost Rider for the PlayStation 2. But yeah, I'll leave this archive page in the description so that you guys can read it. I pretty much went over everything, but yeah, that was my idea. Overall, I really like the general idea of the Ooze, and it's a real shame that Sega kind of just sat on this property and never did anything with it. I mean, this cover art shows a rather cool looking character, and I feel like it could have been turned into a more long-running franchise. Now, at the same time, I did say that Radical Entertainment were set to be the developers, and I feel like Radical Entertainment probably could have pulled off something with character like the Ooze, because like I said, they did the Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction, and I know the Hulk is not the same as the Ghost Rider, but you probably could have found a middle ground between the combat system of Ghost Rider for the PlayStation 2 and Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction also for the PlayStation 2, which obviously me and my brother played the hell out of as kids. You can tell that I got better at writing by the stage which I wrote this at, but obviously it wasn't complete. It was kind of just a collection of different concepts. But I see the vision. The younger version of me may have been onto something. And you know what? After several of the writing revisits we've done on this channel, that's good enough for me. Not everything needs to be perfect. But you know what would be perfect? If you hit the like button and commented. And if you really want to, I'm not going to force you or anything, but maybe subscribe. Regardless of that, let me know what you guys think and whether you found that interesting at all. Tell me what your thoughts are on the Ooze game. Did anyone else play this in Mega Collection Plus like I did? Let me know in the comments. And aside from that, I will see you guys in the next video.